When I was 19, I met the love of my lives. I had never been with anyone else, had never even really kissed anyone else. Though he didn't look like the man I had envisioned as my husband in visions and dreams years before, I connected deep with something inside. I was raised as a lawless pagan, but I entered an order at the age of 13 and committed myself to spiritual studies. Still, I had no real morals regarding premarital sex or even multiple partners. I was pure, but I had no expectations. I was okay with the idea that we would just play together, learn from each other, and then move on with our lives. So when our passion overcame us, I was shocked at how much I cleaved to him. I was claimed, I was ruined, as my mother would say. I wanted him, and only him, forever. Everyone else just melted away, and I couldn't even see their faces. It was just him, my husband. But I digress. This is another story for another day. Of course, this connection led me to become pregnant with his children. I had twins. This news was met with anger, disgust, and resentment from my family. In my mother's eyes, I had committed the most vile sin, not because of sleeping with someone, but because she perceived that this was happening in her house. She was more mad about the location and my choice of sexual partner than she was that I got knocked up. Little did she know that this didn't really occur in the house anyway. I was completely shamed. My mother took it upon herself to locate a clinic in the city to take care of it. I think she may have asked me what I wanted to do in the beginning, but if she did, I know that she would have been boring a hole into my forehead with those steely sheepdog eyes, jaw set, trying to control the breathing, ensuring that I made the right decision. I do know that she said multiple times, "I only wanted one child. I will not raise another, Jess." This was confusing, because though our tribes are tiny, we are very communal in living space. There is no deadline on when we have to leave the home, so long as we are contributing to it, and we are happy, functional adults. So I assumed that I would have these babies, I would have my section of the house, as I was always supposed to anyway. My husband would live and work with us, and we would take care of the family, not just the babies, but her as well. I thought my husband would get a job. I could get a job if I had to, or continue serving the needs of the household, taking care of animals. I thought we would pay for our needs and contribute to the bills. But no. Suddenly everything I had been taught about our ways of life changed in an instant. So, I, quote-unquote, made the choice to take care of it. After all, I didn't want to burden my mother any more than I had to these past 18 years. She was a working single mother after all. My husband wasn't even allowed to say, not at all. I don't even remember talking about it with him. The first time I went to the clinic, my mother ushered me in, set me on a chair, and went up to fill out all of my paperwork, get me checked in. Then they called me to a room with a heavily locking door, where they asked me both medical questions and personal questions. Then they asked me, "Is anyone forcing you to be here?" I was thinking that they were talking about my husband, and of course not. I didn't think about my own mother. She was just looking out for me. She had my future interests at heart. After testing and poking and prodding, treating me like one of 1,000, like I was a faceless object, I was scheduled for surgery. They did not give me information, no details of the procedure. This was supposed to be a family planning clinic, and they did not give me any other options or encourage me to make any other choice other than abortion. They gave me pamphlets on birth control and told me to pick one. I chose the patch. Now I know years later that that was a really dangerous thing to do. But there were no pamphlets referring me to adoption agencies or resources to help me keep my babies. A few nights before the surgery, my body aching and feeling the changes within, that primal urge to protect your offspring, I went to my mother. We watched TV for a little while, and I finally got the courage to bring up children and families and things like that. And I remember saying, it kind of makes me wonder, kind of made me think that maybe I could actually, do this. That's as far as I got before my mother's face hardened and her downwards mouth said, Jess, you can't. You can't. You can't even take care of yourself. What about your career? I mean, it's really up to you, but, She turned her sour, disapproving look back to the TV, and that was the end of that conversation. I was so in need of her approval, so desperate to make an impact and to be a shining example of how she raised me on her own. I didn't even question it again. I could see that it would dishonor her, so I would do what needed to be done. It was apparently the only way, and I was just a dependent 19-year-old who didn't know anything about the world. On the way down to the clinic, I was heavy and scared. But any time I ever acted like this, not just in this case, but any time growing up, and then some, it irritated my mother, who didn't like to see me sulky and pissy. It would put her in an instant, mocking, bad mood, and so I learned how to adapt a bubbly, humorous approach to mask the pain and fear I was having. So I kept this up through my intake, probably leading the staff to think I was just happy as hell to be doing this, when in reality I questioned every step. Once inside the building, I was led to a waiting room. There were only 2 or 3 people there. Some just looked so comfortable, reading magazines, bobbing their foot, watching Jerry Springer on the little TV. When it was my turn, into another locked room we went, where they took my vitals and such. They explained about the anesthesia and all of that, and then sent me upstairs to another waiting room. And now I was alone, just me, in this quiet room, TV on, but no volume. Shadows cast eerily onto the gray carpet from the cheap blinds in the window. 12 weeks. 12 weeks I had carried these babies, going through the worst of it. I barely remember having morning sickness or lethargy. 12 weeks of just them growing to the rhythm of my heart, a result in a divine union, a sacred act between their father and myself and God. And then they called me to have an ultrasound. There, I tried hard not to look at the monitor. In fact, they kept it a little bit behind the head to make it difficult to see, but I did see. And I heard them when they murmured to each other, "Cardiac activity? Right here. Okay, freeze that for the file." Then they came to me and said, "Well, it looks like it's a good thing you came in when you did, because it looks like there are complications in development." They convinced me that something was wrong with them, and it was actually a medical necessity to have this procedure after all. So they took me downstairs into pre-op. There were so many people, so little time to get my thoughts together. I just ended up submitting and doing as they directed. They say it's your choice, but I can guarantee once you step beyond that first set of doors, they're not going to let you back out. They're not going to let you change your mind, even after the ultrasound. Nobody asked me if I was doing okay, or if I wanted some space to think about things, or sign another paper after the ultrasound saying that, yes, I was still okay with this. It was just one person dragging you to the next room, to the next person, boom, 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 like a well-oiled machine. When I was still groggy from surgery, the nurse tried to get me to put on this pad to contain the blood, and I just stood up, bare-assed in the recovery room. She worked to surround me with a towel while still trying to stabilize me as I said, "I don't care. If anyone sees my nakedness, I have no shame." To which she replied, "Well, maybe other people don't want to see your nakedness, though." And I just laughed and shrugged. From there, she directed me to a little stall which she said contained my clothes. She escorted my staggering half-naked self to that room, and I proceeded to try and get dressed. There was no physical pain, yet. Once dressed, she led me to one last room. She told me to wait while they sent my discharge papers. While sitting there, my eyes still adjusting, I noticed a certificate of the doctor who owned this clinic, and I recognized the name immediately. Edward Allred. I knew him as Ed. He was the main go-to at the racecourse I trained horses for. This was some kind of sick joke and a small world. Well, at least I knew where he was getting his money from to do what he was able to do at the racetrack. When I told the discharge nurse about Ed in Los Alamitos racecourse, she said, "Oh, I know. Every year he pays for all the staff to go to the races for a couple days." I was starting to waken up. I was starting to hurt. I took the papers, my patches, and a prescription for more patches, but nothing for pain. They told me to take aspirin. And I limped to the parking lot. Nobody got out of the van to help me get in. Nobody asked if I was okay. My mother just asked, "How did it go?" And I said, "Well, I was pregnant and now I'm not, so I guess good." I told her that I couldn't do any heavy lifting for a week, that I needed to stay down and drink a lot of water. She kind of rolled her eyes, but nodded at that, and we headed home. I think my husband was there, but if he was sitting somewhere in the back feeling small and weak. He too never asked me how I was feeling, but to be fair, I never thought of his feelings at all during that point in my life. I just didn't want to dishonor my mother. From her, there was never any hugs or compassion or empathy. After all, she had had an abortion at the age of 16, and she toughened up. It was never really spoken about again. For months after, I was a roller coaster of emotions, but I kept them heavily concealed by that, life goes on mentality. Anytime I questioned myself, I would comfort myself with lines like, "It was the only way. It wasn't the right time." But I soon found myself wanting to have a baby. Our cultural beliefs dictate that the souls get recycled back, and so I thought, if I could provide another vessel, maybe the souls that I sent away could come back and I would be spared from such guilt. I performed a ritual about a year later, calling the soul back, and I conceived. However, I was again met with the same disdain and contempt from my mother, but this time she elected to take me to an actual OBGYN instead of the clinic, mostly because she had heard that this particular doctor was cute. They basically discussed me as if I weren't there, and I had to sit among all these happy pregnant women in the waiting room. I had an ultrasound, they showed me the heart, and then he gave me misoprostol and told me to go home, take it, sit in a warm bath, put my feet up, and try to get through it. I did, but nothing happened. I seemed to expel a weird pinkish tissue and cloudy pee, a sample I took back to the OBGYN, but the baby was still there. Instead of seeing this as a miracle and working to convince me to keep this baby, they now turned to Plan B. I was told because of the nature of this medication, it was likely to negatively affect the fetus, so they wanted to schedule a D&C and make sure I didn't get an infection. Hell no. I was not going to let this happen again. I went home, found my old apothecary books, and found a concoction reported to cause miscarriage. I followed the instructions, taking a tincture 3 times a day for 3 days. On the 4th day, I was dragged in for another ultrasound. They couldn't find the heartbeat. They tried to reassure me that sometimes it's just hard to see, but I knew. I had killed this baby too. And what's worse is I felt relieved at that moment. Soon after came the horrendous experience of passing everything. In the heat of an August night, I suffered through the worst cramping and bleedings of my life. I was all alone. My mother had to go to work. My husband was working in another state, chased off by her. My only friend at the time couldn't stand to be around me in so much pain, so he left too. On top of it, I had a cat delivering kittens that needed help. So in a tiny bathroom with no ventilation, pouring sweat, bleeding profusely, I still helped bring 4 little lives into the world, while mine waited to be passed into nothingness. No one to hold my hair back away from my damp face. No one to hold my hand during the contractions that ripped through my whole body thanks to the herbs I had taken. 9 weeks this time. A hardness settled in over me that night. I felt so cold and cruel. Stupid people tried to use this against me in dumb high school dramas that occurred well into our 20s. They told me things like, "You killed your own flesh and blood, you were a monster." And I would agree. I knew full well what I had done, and I swore at that time, if given the chance, I would do it again. This horrified people, but it made it harder to hurt me. Life went on after that. I vowed I would not allow myself to get into such a position again. I took 2 forms of birth control and did monthly tinctures just in case. I've always been hyperfertile. In fact, I got pregnant on birth control twice. I continued to work myself to the bone, trading horses, managing the household, taking care of my mother so she could work at the hospital. I started drinking regularly and popping more and more pills. I was prescribed pain medication, Xanax, Ativan, Ambien, Soma. I started fighting, really fighting with my husband, like knockdown, drag-out fights sometimes.
I even wielded a knife. He was drinking too, and it made him so cruel and callous and indifferent toward me. Not at all how he is. I had my offspring in 2010 in the middle of this chaos, 5 years after the first abortion. His entrance to this world was mysterious and miraculous as well, but again, another story for another day. I didn't think about the souls I had sent back all those years before. Not for years and years. I was always confident that I had done the right thing, that I was too young back then. But then as I rounded out into my 35th year, 16 years after that horrible first experience, something shifted in me. It was like God himself was talking to me, reminding me that I was supposed to have more children. Almost like we had a contract and that I had not fulfilled my end of it. There was sorrow attached to these encounters, and I was shown what could have been, what should have been. My only offspring, so divine, so special, was the blueprint. Pure perfection in my eyes, just enough flaw and disadvantages to make him strong-willed, humorous about the things he is lacking, like height, and ultra-confident in the skills and traits he knows he has. He is smart enough to be defiant, but loyal enough to know what he is supposed to do anyway, and to do it. Passionate about his interest, playful enough not to take it all too seriously. Pure perfection, and I loved every single minute of raising him to this point. It killed me to know that I would never get this chance again, that he really was going to be the only heir to the tribe, and therefore he would carry all the burdens too, alone. I told God that this must be my punishment for doing what I had done, but these feelings turned into rage and paranoia. Repressed emotions manifested in terrible ways on the surface. Where I had not had this rage except when drinking, it was coming now unbidden at every little inconvenience. I was having dreams of Bast holding a tiny baby, walking around and bouncing it. She would offer the baby to me, and I would raise my arms up to take it, then I would hesitate, and drop my arms and shake my head no, and she would look sad and turn away. In one dark vision, she drowned the baby in front of me, and the river turned red with its blood as her nails dug into its tiny neck. Even my own goddess Sekhmet began to turn away in these visions. I started to see what I had done in a whole new light. These visions and thoughts, the calling, grew stronger and stronger until I nearly had a full breakdown in October of 2023. I had sensed that my time was up. I wasted what time had been left. I had broken my covenant with the Aten, with God. From time to time, I would finally think that I had come to some sort of peace, of resolve. I was okay with this. I accepted what I had done was wrong, a sin, but I also knew I couldn't change it. I would remind myself that I had lived a very fulfilling life. My one offspring was happy, healthy, and smart, and just ambitious enough. I worked with animals and dedicated my service in every way. I submitted to my husband, and I submitted to God, and I was at peace. And then it would all come crashing down again. This has been a consistent struggle in my life now, and I could say with full confidence that it began for me that November afternoon in 2005. The only thing I can do now is share my story and hope that I can dissuade others from making my same mistake. I used to hold the position of my body, my choice. Not anymore. The way I see it now, this is not my body. This body belongs to the Aten, to God. I am supposed to be a divine representative, and it's a lot like leasing a car. You can drive it, add whatever gas you want, do with it as you please, but at the end of the day, it still belongs to the dealership, and they're going to judge you on how well you took care of it while you had it. They're not going to want to see scratches in the paint, holes in the seat, and ashes on the floorboards. They're going to charge you extra if you've dented it or cracked the windshield. Even if you had insurance to cover all of these things, best believe that they're still going to judge your character, and you probably won't be able to lease another one from them, at least not without some serious side-eye. No, my body is a divine vessel, designed specifically for a purpose, a vehicle to transport my soul on this plane of existence, and a portal to bring life onto this plane of existence, an extension of the Most High himself. It's so easy for us to fall for the just not the right time line. How do we know? Just like it's not really our body, it's also not really our time. It's God's time. Who are we to question it? I used to think, well, we were only 19. We would have struggled so badly. We just couldn't have done it back then. How do we know? What if that was the incentive needed for us to go out and make our own lives, to inspire us to do better? Maybe I wouldn't have started drinking or taking so many pills. I say this because even as adults, we've had to struggle really bad. In 2019, we didn't eat meat or sugars for a year because we were so poor. We lived on rice and corn cakes so that our offspring and our animal charges could have meat. And we still had a really great time together. It was truly our hardest and happiest year. It taught us so many things, and we grew so strong from that experience. In short, to have an abortion is to have a complete lack of faith. Faith in a higher power, of course, but also a lack of faith in yourself. You have no idea how strong you are, how smart, how resourceful, until you have to suffer and struggle. I promise the rewards are much greater when you do, and it puts you so far ahead of the game. I hope this message reaches a young woman in need who might be questioning her choices. I hope it inspires her to make the right decision. If you're out there, young lady, know that you are not alone, and truly, everything does happen for a reason.